Hello and welcome to the first session in the series on the impact of trends in migration and their impact on humanitarian actions. And this episode is on the focus will be on migration law, in which we will discuss refugee law violations, difficult compromises, and options for the future. My name is Baram Sadeghi, and I have the great honor and greater responsibility to be your moderator today. So now it's time for the man of the hour. Thomas, you are our main speaker today. Thomas Spijkerboer, professor of migration law at the Vrije Universiteit Amsterdam, right where we are. Am I right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And if you look at the borders of Europe, and we are witnessing, people in Ukraine, Belarus, the Balkan, and of course still Mediterranean Sea. We see pushbacks. Sometimes very violent pushbacks. We see what some people describe as ping pong with refugees. There, to there, there, to there, like a ping pong match. And if you look outside Europe, we see refugees in Libya, sometimes imprisoned and dehumanized. What's the bigger picture? Can we say that we are witnessing the failure of, or maybe you should say complete failure of refugee rights? What are your thoughts about that?
I will give a bit long-winded answer because I think we tend to focus on the most recent crisis and to think that is history. That's not the case. Even if you look back only to 1951, you see that
was a time when we, the year of the refugee law.
Yeah, so the UN Refugee Convention was adopted in 1951, and it was the first international law instrument with a general refugee definition that was not made, at least not according to the letter of the convention, for one particular group. Before the war, there were conventions for Assyrian Chaldeo refugees from the Ottoman Empire. So there were very specific treaties for a specific group. This was the first convention with the first international law instrument with a general definition. Even if you look at that instrument, if you read the minutes that were made of the meetings preparing this, you see kind of the same debate that there's now. So there are some countries with lots of refugees at the time, Yugoslavia, Italy, France.
So they harbored refugees.
Yeah,
Yugoslavia, Italy, and France. From which countries?
From Spain, from Germany, so the war refugees. Germany itself had lots of ethnic Germans coming back after centuries from Eastern Europe.
From other Eastern Europe.
Yugoslavia and Italy had many refugees from countries where the communists had taken over. So they had, for different reasons, different groups of refugees, and they were really overburdened with it. So they had a problem. So in the beginning of this political process that led to the 1951 convention, you saw that these countries wanted a very expansive, generous refugee definition because they thought that North America, Latin America, and Australia would resettle these people. During the 2 years this process took, it was clear that resettlement was not going to happen. So then these countries changed course and said, no, we want a very narrow refugee definition because then we will have legal obligations towards less people. A completely familiar kind of process. So something that we very much know right now. So in itself, this is not new. What is new is that Europe is more affected by refugees now than it has been for the past 4 or 5 decades. So since this post-war problem was solved, Europe is now a continent of refugees. The Yugoslav war was the first big shock, that's really close. Syria was really close, and now Ukraine is really close. So that's new. And in response to these new groups of refugees that now affected Europe more or less directly, Europe has let go increasingly of the pretense that it will live up to international law, with the interesting and major exception of Ukraine.
Yeah, we will talk about that, of course, because that's an exception. Let's not forget that's an exception.
But it's a big one.
That's a big one, yeah. So are you saying that, correct me if I'm wrong, by the way, I'm looking at you as well, so if you have any question, raise your hand. Are you saying that there is nothing new under the sun? That it has only a new jacket and new appearance, but it's all the same, but the numbers are getting bigger, and it's all focused on Europe. So there is nothing wrong about the law intrinsic. Did you say that?
No, the numbers are not going up.
Even the numbers are not going up.
They are. Europe is unusually affected by it. The numbers were always there, but before they were safely far away in Africa or any other places we couldn't tell apart. Yeah. But so it's Europe that is more affected now. And secondly, in Europe the gloves are off. So Europe has less and less hesitation to say international law, not that interested. Now you saw that in particular. So what struck me about the Poland, Lithuania, Belarus border this fall was that there were massive pushbacks which were not even denied. So it was the European Commission documents simply said, 40,000 people have been turned away at the Polish border. These are 40,000 violations of international law. So that's what I mean with the gloves are off. For me, that's new. The states don't make the effort of denying they violate international law. They simply said, well done, thumbs up.
Just to get it clear still, so the law is okay. There is nothing wrong about the law, or we shouldn't, put effort in adjusting the law. But it's about the implementation of the law, keeping up the law, and try to figure out a system in order to fight the violations.
Well, of course, when I think a moment when you see that European states, so the extremely wealthy states, openly violate international law, I think it's a good moment to step back and to reflect and to think, what is international law worth? Shall we throw it out of the window? That would be one. Like if nobody cares, why should we care? Why should I care? Writing it. Books on refugee law get thicker and thicker and thicker over the decades. So maybe we should get to one sheet. Like, this is the convention, and it's violated. Refugee law. The Refugee Convention was made in 1951 as a very problematic compromise between different countries. Just like it's a bit like the EU now. However, it was evidently a very Eurocentric convention made to address a European refugee problem. You can see that in the text, not only in the history, in the text of the convention itself. You can see it in the refugee definition, and you can see that in the whole way European states look at the Refugee Convention. So it's still, they think it's there for them. One of the places where you see this is the very problematic relation between the limitations that refugee law puts on states, and the first thing that, for example, the European Court of Human Rights will say about a migration case. If a migration or asylum case comes before the Strasbourg Court, the European Court of Human Rights, the first thing the court says is not human rights, it's the right of states. It begins every single decision, except I think we've now identified 2 decisions where the clerk of the court forgot to copy-paste the standard text block. So that's in tens of thousands of cases. The first thing that the court says is, under well-established law, states have the right to control migration, except if. So they invert the normal, they put human rights on its head.
Oh.
Normally, a human rights, if a policeman beats you up, the first thing a human rights court will come up with is a person has a right not to be ill-treated.
Yeah.
Sometimes a policeman has to maintain order, so you control the state.
Yeah.
And here it's the human being that's being controlled. Because has the human being established there's an exception. The refugee says, I'm an exception. So you see in the whole structure of international law that this is how this is typical for European and so for Europe and North America and Australia, that it's human rights law upside down, inside out. It's a completely immigration law and refugee law is the only field where this happens.
So can we say that the law is maybe still good, but the spirit of the law, or as we say in Dutch, de geest van de wet, the idea about the general idea about the law has been vanished-ish.
International law on these points is ambiguous. So it says something for refugees and it says something for states. And let's say the daily bread of lawyers in this field is to do the fine-tuning. And this fine-tuning actually matters because small differences have an impact. And I think I speak for many in my field that we said, well, last fall we said, well, it's about time to think of something else.
Yeah.
Because it's simply not relevant. And then suddenly you see the Ukraine. Just like the war in Bosnia was a very good thing for refugee law because European states actually needed it and wanted to apply it. Now you see something similar for in Ukraine that European states actually say these people need protection, we need to share this, we need support of other parts of the world, things that Africa has been saying, I mean, since forever.
So would this war or maybe recent crisis, would it lead to an adjustment of the refugee law? Would you foresee that in the next future?
I think it will not lead to an adjustment in the letter, but in this fine-tuning, I think it makes a bit of a difference. It makes a bit of a difference that it now becomes harder for leading politicians to say refugees, we don't care, because we do care and they're fleeing our geopolitical opponents, and so of course we want to protect them just to annoy the guy. Yeah. So it brings a different dynamic that makes me think of the Bosnian War, where you had similar scenes on TV, on Dutch TV news of good, completely ethnically Dutch housefathers with tears in their eyes because they had redecorated the guest room and they were not allowed to have a Bosnian refugee in it, and they really wanted that. Yeah. So that lasts very briefly. So I'm very skeptical about how long this will last.
Because now we have the same that people are inviting and welcoming on a personal level.
Yeah, but we have forgotten the enormous waves of goodwill that came over this continent after the picture of Aylan Kurdi had been circulated for about three months. We were all
the little boy,
the little Syrian boy who died who drowned between
Turkey and Greece.
But it lasted about 3 months. So I'm eager to see how long this will last. But it makes a difference.
No, you are not eager to see, but you know that it will last only 3 months.
Well,
you know. Am I right?
No. The difference here may be that if the geopolitical conflict continues, then the interest in sheltering the victims of your opponent continues. So this is a different ballgame.
Let's go back to the main subject. Two points I would like to highlight. First of all, when we see these violations, made by, for example, Frontex, the European Border and Coast Guard Agency, they are involved in the pushbacks. Have we seen, people going to the court to make a court case of that, and what are the results of that, and would it be necessary to do that?
There are people maybe here who know more about that than I do. Yes, there are court cases. And the most interesting ones are the ones that are going to the Strasbourg and Luxembourg courts to hear, to see. So it will be interesting to see what these courts will do with these cases. It's evident that this is, again, a violation of international law. But I have to say that I'm not sure that these two courts will establish that, because since 2014, these two courts have been literally bending over backwards to try not to call things by their name, and there are cases which under their previous case law would have led to evident violations. And now, for example, in the case about the EU-Turkey deal, the Luxembourg court it gave a judgment where a student at this university, you would fail your exam. It's evidently wrong. And they knew, at least they must have known because they're good lawyers. Yeah. But they didn't want to touch the case, so they declared the court incompetent to hear the case.
And it was
and
not,
it's simply
big.
Wrong.
We are talking about EU-Turkey law.
Yeah.
You know, it was very big impact regarding people, money, energy. And you say they wouldn't touch it.
They want to. So I'm not. So what I wanted to say is I'm not sure that these two courts will be prepared to establish that Frontex has been instrumental in violating international law pretty much on a daily basis.
Yeah. How come, by the way, that these courts, they wouldn't even think about make a judgment about Frontex?
The courts operate in a political environment, and they have to pick their battles.
Are you saying that the courts, so political environment, and since we have probably all over Europe we have democracies more or less, so, and we are choosing politicians, so the courts, that's us. That's we don't care.
No, it's to give you an example. On the morning that
Thomas, you just said that this is a political decision. They are the political atmosphere, and political atmosphere that's created by us. We choose governments.
But to give you an example, on the morning that the Luxembourg court gave a judgment on whether a Syrian family from Aleppo had a right to a visa to apply for asylum in Belgium, that it would allow them to travel safely to Europe instead of using one of these terrible boats.
Yeah.
The morning before that judgment, the morning of that judgment, the Volkskrant,
one of the biggest national
a nice, huggable,
newspapers,
pleasant, well-thinking.
Leftish.
They opened their opening headline was EU court may blow up Dublin.
Oh,
well, that was a sensationalist, and they captured
the Dublin,
the atmosphere very much.
Dublin ruling,
and so that is the context in which this court has to operate.
Yeah.
And then I think it's obvious that they will think. So this was indeed the well-thinking Volkskrant. So they will think twice before doing something that may basically lead to their own demise. So they will hesitate before doing something extremely controversial. Yeah. And maybe they will keep their capacity for doing something controversial once every 10 years for the euro or for the rule of law in Hungary. Yeah. So you can't do that every day. So you have to choose.
Nevertheless, if I hear you, again, correct me if I'm wrong, if I hear you correctly, you said they should do that. That's the only job they have to do, to imply the law every single day, not in once in a 5 year or a big stuff. Every single day, the law. Am I right?
You have too high expectations of the law, I think. But I think my conclusion would be that we need fundamental rethinking and proactive. We need to. Both NGOs and academics are very defensive, very reactive, and we need to rethink. I think our normative position, and we should dare to be normative. Like, this is the position we take. And somehow we got intimidated by that's moralist and that's not realistic and how can you?
Yeah.
However, it's very difficult because most alternatives are the current policies flipped. So it's open borders. So that's simply flipping the current policy. And so a recommendation I have is to read the articles of Tendai Achume, who also happens to be the Special Rapporteur Against Racism, whom we know from the Zwarte Piet, from her Zwarte Piet intervention. She has also written a mind-blowing article called Migration as Decolonization. The original version is 70 pages and heavy-duty academic stuff. She has also written a shorter version in the American version of the Groene Amsterdammer or something like it. So a more general version where she really goes back to the drawing table and says, where does migration law come from? Yeah. What problem does it address? And how can we think of an alternative? Her proposal is very controversial, very problematic, but it's the first time in decades, or maybe, it's the first time in decades that I read something really new.
Wow.
And it's really worthwhile.
And so we are talking about someone who has been around the block for a while. Still, people can surprise you with their fundamental work.
Yeah, so I think that's because it's a really different way of thinking. I'm very much attracted to at least maybe this is not it, but this is she's really jumping out of the track and trying to restart thinking from scratch. Yeah. And I think that's an incredible achievement, regardless of what you conclude.
Yeah. So, yeah. Okay. Of course, you three. Thank you so much for being with us, and you people live. It's so nice to have live audience here in Vrije Universiteit. I'm so glad you're here, and of course, people, the online people. Thank you so much. We will have at least 4 more sessions. Let me highlight a couple of them. For example, migration trends with Leo Lucas, one of the brightest people, professor at the International Institute of Social History on this area, migration and politics, with Tineke Strik, European Parliament, and climate refugees. And the final session would be about the international NGOs here in the Netherlands, discuss the main learnings of our series. Having said that, please keep an eye on the website of KUNO. And of course, the people behind the camera, one of them you saw in front of camera, it was Peter Heinze, one of the engines, one of the motors of this series, and Laurie Bolling, who is still behind the camera operating everything. Thank you, Laurie. Thank you, Peter. And then again, thank you all. Okay, go in peace. Thank you.